Government Standing Committee on Health. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. In accordance with our routine motion, I'm informing the committee that all remote participants have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting. Everyone in the meeting is participating virtually with the exception of Madame Vignola. So she and I are in the room in Ottawa. Pursuant to Standing Order 106 Sub 4, the committee is meeting to consider a request by members of the committee to undertake a study concerning a contract between Medicago and the Government of Canada. The floor is open. Dr. Ellis.
Well, thank you very much, Chair, and Happy New Year to everyone. And yes, I have grown a mustache since you last saw me. So just to clear up any confusion there may be. That being said, the reason we're here today, of course, is a much more serious topic, and that is the topic of $150 million paid to Medicago and Mitsubishi by the Liberal government. The concern that the Conservatives and I believe I will not speak for Madame Vignola, that the bloc share, as they did sign our letter of concern in the 106.4, is of course the fact that when we read the redacted contracts which we'd been provided with, and remember a matter of public availability, what we don't see there is the reason why $150 million was provided to Medicago. And what we heard from the Minister of Health and the President of Medicago was that this is a requirement under the advanced purchase agreements or something similar to that. And when you read the redacted contracts very clearly, that is not there. Therefore, the concern that we have is there a problem with the veracity of the testimony given before this committee by the minister and the president of Medicago, or is the problem related to the fact that the unredacted copies of the contract and among other valuable items to which we at this committee have not been privy, that we know that those potentially may shine light onto this very serious issue of loss of $150 million. So with that being said, we thought it important on an urgent basis to get everybody back. I think that we all know the story of what has gone on here, that Medicago had a partnership with Philip Morris International, which therefore, because of the WHO's and the framework on tobacco that was also signed by Canada, therefore the WHO rejected the vaccine which was created by Medicago, which was because of course Philip Morris International was one of the partners associated with this development program. The difficulty that happened thereafter, of course, is that not only did the federal government provide Medicago with $173 million in startup costs, and when they closed, 600 jobs were lost in Quebec. The vaccine was rejected by the WHO, which Canada really wanted to give to the COVAX program, which is an entirely different story. Of course, Canada being the only developed country that took vaccines from the COVAX program because of our slow start with respect to getting domestically produced vaccines. And therefore, what we became left with was the fact that indeed no vaccines were produced by Medicago, in spite of the fact that multi-millions of dollars were provided to that company by the Trudeau Liberals in conjunction perhaps with their NDP partners. But that being said, we do know very clearly that no vaccines were delivered, and Canadians were then on the hook for the full bill with nothing to show for it. Thereafter, of course, Medicago closed its operations, and strangely enough, what happened thereafter was suddenly, in a very thick tomb put out by public accounts, what we saw was under a curious a curious heading called losses, and I quote this: losses of public money due to an offense, illegal act, or accident. In a 4-inch tomb, 3/4 of the way down, this $150 million was buried without any explanation. And because of that, we did, of course, bring the president of Medicago and the minister of health to committee, which sadly did not shed any light on the particular problem. And then that all, of course, sent us home reviewing the contracts and trying desperately to understand why another $150 million was paid. When the president of Medicago appeared at committee, he also stated very clearly that his company owned the building, it owned the machinery inside it, and it owned the intellectual property. Now, some of those things have changed since. That being said, that was his contention back last spring. And here we are now having the taxpayers of Canada on the hook for over $300 million. And it also, I'll be perfectly transparent here, that there is an unverified story that says that the parent company of Medicago, Mitsubishi, multi-billion-dollar multinational company, paid $40 million back to the government of Canada. And once again, it becomes unclear as to why that happened. And what we're asking for here on behalf of the taxpayers of Canada is for clarity so that they can understand why their hard-earned tax dollars in a fiscal environment which has seen inflation soar to 40-year highs, in a fiscal environment which we see them every month being $200 away from insolvency, in a fiscal environment which sees that mortgage costs have doubled, in a fiscal environment which sees rent has doubled. They are unable to put food on the table, a roof over their head, and as we see in Alberta, barely able to keep the heat on. So those are the reasons why we find it incredibly necessary to call an urgent meeting of the Standing Committee on Health to hold all of those people to account for their actions associated with this particular loss of $300 million plus of taxpayer hard-earned money. So to that end, we do have a motion to put forward to this committee, and I'm happy to read it out. It's rather lengthy, and I will start with saying that pursuant to Standing Order 108.1 open bracket A close bracket, this committee ordered the production of unredacted copies of the vaccine supply contract between the Government of Canada and Medicago Inc., dated 13th November 2020, and the committee orders the production of all contracts between Medicago Inc. and the Department of Innovation, Science and Industry under the Strategic Innovation Fund regarding the development of COVID vaccines and the capital investment in Medicago's manufacturing plant. And the committee orders the production of all contracts between the Government of Canada, Medicago, and the Aramis company regarding the transfer of ownership of the former Medicago plant and the transfer of the intellectual property of Medicago's COVID vaccine. Further, the committee agrees to a study of at least 6 meetings to examine these contracts and that the following witnesses be invited. Minister Mark Holland, Minister of Health, Minister Francois Philippe Champagne, Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry, Assistant to the Deputy Minister of the Strategic Innovation Fund, Department of Innovation, Science and Industry, officials from the Public Health Agency of Canada, the President of Medicago, the President of Aramis, and any other witnesses deemed relevant by the committee, and that the Standing Committee prepare a report with its findings for the House. I do have that I could email that to the clerk if that would be helpful. and then it could be distributed. So those are the concerns. I think I've tried to be fairly concise in outlining them. I know we haven't been at committee for a while, so I thought it germane to bring forward those issues and make sure that the millions of people watching understand clearly why we need an urgent meeting to discuss the loss of funds and what the requirements are moving forward to understand very clearly where the $300 million went. With incredible transparency, we asked this committee to consider this motion. So, Chair, I will stop there. I do apologize for not being there. I was on an airplane this morning, sat on the airplane for an hour, and then they decided that they decided I didn't need to be in Ottawa with you, Mr. Casey. So I apologize for not being there, but there was no flight out of Halifax to get me there. So with that, I will leave it. And if please give me instruction if you'd like me to email that to the clerk.
Yes. First of all, I'm also sorry that you're not here, Dr. Ellis, but it's a real pleasure to see you on screen. Feel free to send that to the clerk, and I believe it would be in order for us to briefly suspend to allow for people to have a look at it and determine next steps. The next up on the speakers list is Mr. Perkins and then Dr. Hanley. But if we could just suspend for 5 to 10 minutes to make sure that everybody has a copy of the motion in both official languages. I will say this, based on hearing the motion, Dr. Ellis, it is in order. I just want everybody to have a look at it, and then we can continue the debate with Mr. Perkins. So we stand suspended for...
Mr. Chair, if I could, I think my office has just emailed it to the clerk.
Okay.
Just for ease of distribution.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Perkins. We stand suspended for 10 minutes. received an email copy of the motion in both official languages, so we're going to proceed. We're going to proceed with the speakers list, beginning with Mr. Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Happy New Year, everyone. Good to see you all. I too intended to be there in person, but had the same flight issues of Mr. Ellis. So I'd like to begin, particularly for those who aren't following and maybe not as familiar with the issue as the members around the table. In November 2020, the Liberal government of Canada signed within 5 days 2 contracts with a firm called Medicago, based in Quebec City, which was owned a majority by Mitsubishi Chemicals, the largest company in Japan and the 43rd largest company in the world, and minority ownership, the Philip Morris tobacco giant. They signed 2 contracts from 2 different government departments. The first contract was a contract from the industry department, known as the ISED, but their minister's title is the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry, Minister Champagne. And they signed a contract to develop a non-mRNA COVID vaccine. And part of that contract was also a contract to provide capital upgrades to the plants. But primarily the money was to develop a vaccine that was yet not developed or invented. That contract at the time was worth more than $220 million. 5 days later, the Liberal government of Canada signed another contract with Medicago to purchase the vaccine, which had not yet been invented. That vaccine contract stated that the initial batch would be for 20 million doses at a cost of approximately $30 a dose, or $600 million, if the vaccine was invented and managed to get through all the approval processes. Well, Medicago did invent such a vaccine made from a derivation of the tobacco plant, and it received Health Canada approval in February 2022. By this time, the government of Canada had purchased several hundred million doses already of alternative vaccines from other global providers. So shortly after that, in December, Mitsubishi bought December 2023, Mitsubishi bought the entire company, and about 6 weeks later, shut Medicago down, putting more than 400 people in Quebec City out of work. The president of Medicago appeared before this committee at the time under questioning and said Medicago owned all the intellectual property that was paid for by the taxpayer to invent this vaccine. They were in negotiations, they said, and as did Minister Champagne, said they were in negotiations when questioned about who owned the intellectual property that taxpayers paid for, and that the government never received a vial of. So while they contracted for 20 million doses, by the time it got Health Canada approval, the government no longer, according to the Minister of Health's testimony before this committee before Christmas, no longer needed that vaccine. So we have a situation here that may be confusing to people. So just shortly after the Minister of Health appeared before this committee, the government made an announcement. In fact, I think the announcement was on December 8th, on a settlement with Medicago. And that settlement was that Medicago would pay back $40 million of the $220 million contract signed with the Minister of Industry. So that contract actually ended up only being, I think it was $173 million that was spent out of the 223. They were paying back 40 million of that. And the minister's press release says that was mainly to deal with the capital investments to renovate the facility in Quebec City. It wasn't about a payment supposedly to get back the intellectual property. They also announced in that, though, that Medicago was being generous, that they were going to give the plant to a group of local managers, along with the vaccine intellectual property that Canadian taxpayers had paid for. They were generous in saying that Canadian taxpayers paid for the development of that vaccine, so we're going to give it for $1 to a company called Armas, a new company that would take over the asset of the plant and the intellectual property, made up principally of former employees of Medicago in Quebec City. And so the big kicker in that announcement was that the government was going to pay, in addition to all of that, Mitsubishi Chemicals, the largest company in Japan, $150 million. And the questions at the time were, well, what was that $150 million for? And was it a penalty because we didn't buy the actual 20 million doses of the vaccine? But officials, Ms. Jeffrey from the Health Department and Minister Holland, when they were both before the committee, called this $150 million was an advanced payment out of the vaccine purchase contract. That's the term they use. In fact, the president of Medicago before this committee, shortly after that, I think the week after that, used the exact same term, $150 million for an advance payment. Money's gone, sunk cost, advance payment for the purchase of the 20 million doses of the vaccine, of which the government never received a single vial. This contract, and it's a public contract, a public redacted contract, was released to the Public Accounts Committee. And I've gone through that contract. There is no term advance payment in that contract anywhere. There is no clause in that contract for advance payment. What it does say in the redacted version in clause 8 is that payment will be made in accordance with the basis of the payment schedule in Annex B. So when you go to Annex B, it's an interesting annex to read. It says payment gets received only when the delivery, and there's a delivery schedule, the delivery of the vaccine actually is in the hands of the government of Canada, then check gets cashed. There is no discussion in this contract and no commitment for an advance payment. Nothing. But you know what the kicker of that Annex B is? It's clause 4 of Annex B, which is the right to reduce the quantities. The government of Canada under 4A may give written notice to the contractor to reduce the number of doses ordered by Canada, which clearly the government of Canada went from 20 million to 0. Clause B of Section 4 of that annex of the contract says, if Canada gives notice pursuant to A above, the contractor will have no claim for further payment. No claim. So we have the Minister of Health and officials. We have the President of Medicago appear before this committee saying that the $150 million was a payment for a clause that does not exist. In fact, in the contract, it contradicts that and says the government of Canada owes no money if it reduces the payment. So what is the payment for? It's either, as the minister said in committee, because he never read the contract before he paid the $150 million, he said in response to my question, he hadn't read the contract when he signed off on sending the largest company in Japan $150 million. And if it's not that, because he didn't read the contract and he swore it was an advance payment that was in here, and the president of the company said it was advance payment, they both misled this committee. They misled a committee of parliament. So Mr. MP Ellis's motion, Dr. Ellis's motion says there's such contradiction here, we need to actually do a study and get to the bottom of this. We need the Minister of Industry to come to this committee and explain why he either paid out over $173 million of taxpayer money to develop a vaccine which he didn't own and didn't put the contract provisions or have the smarts to put in the contract he owns. He also then may have been involved in a discussion, because he said publicly he was in a discussion with the company on the terms of repayment of this and the intellectual property And they came clearly to another deal that said, we're going to give you $150 million of taxpayer money on a clause that doesn't exist in the purchase agreement. We need to see the contracts from the Strategic Innovation Fund that the Department of Industry signed, the contract to develop this vaccine, and see whether or not there's advance payment in there. Obviously, there's no advance payment for a vaccine that didn't exist. We need to recall the Minister of Health, the president of Medicago, to explain why they claim there was a clause in this contract to purchase the vaccines that does not exist, why they didn't abide by the contract, which says the government of Canada doesn't owe any money if no vaccines are ordered. We reduce the quantity. What is it? It looks to me like the government of Canada is one of two things. Totally incompetent because none of them ever read the contracts and just accepted and wrote checks. Two, they have actually paid the intellectual property twice. They paid $173 million to Mitsubishi to develop this vaccine, and now they're paying them another $150 million for apparently technology we already own. So what's the basis for that $150 million? The only way we're going to get to the bottom of it is if the contracts under the SIF program that were signed by the industry minister are made public, if the unredacted version of this contract is made public, and if the contracts signed between Medicago, Mitsubishi, and Aramis and the government of Canada on this December 2023 deal that paid the $150 million are made public, so that we can find out why taxpayers have paid over $300 million for a vaccine that never produced a single commercial vial and gave it to taxpayers in Canada. Why is it? This is a massive scandal. I don't believe it's a political scandal in the sense that there may be Liberals involved, but to me it looks like a massive incompetence scandal on behalf of these Liberals yet again, who don't read contracts they sign, who don't read the payments of checks of taxpayer money they send to large global companies. This is outrageous to me. And if this committee does not have a vote for the motion that's here, it's voting for a cover-up. It's voting to cover up the Liberal incompetence on pissing away $300 million of taxpayer money when there is no contractual requirement to do so. Incompetence, stupidity, government waste. What's the reason? What's the reason that ministers came before this committee and claimed they were compelled to give that $150 million payment for a contract and a clause and a term that does not exist? Either it was intentionally misleading this committee or it was just sheer incompetence. So I can't believe that people would be so dumb as to give out $150 million to the largest company in Japan without reading the contract and without verifying that in the bloody contract that it requires them to do so, which it does not. So I call on members to vote for MP Ellis's motion so that this committee can get to the bottom of this $300 million scandal of this Liberal government. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. Dr. Hanley, please.
Thank you, and good morning to everyone. I've certainly been waiting with bated breath to see why we are being called out of our constituency times 2 weeks before Parliament begins, and what is the urgency behind this study. I'm not sure I'm any further enlightened now than I was in light of a Medicago study that actually is still ongoing and still open, and also I think in light of 1064s that have been called in other committees. So I think that there are some tactics going on. And I'm frankly quite worried about whether we are going to see a progress in the studies that we have as a committee committed to already, chiefly the women's health study and the opioid study. that we had, as I understood, an agreement to pursue. We are all for transparency, and in that light, I do have some amendments to propose. I am not in favor of spending 6 meetings further on this when we already have had meetings on Medicago. It has already been before public accounts, and if there is a desire to review contracts, then I think we can support that, but not in favor of further derailing the incredibly important studies that we have on the docket waiting to go when we actually come back into session the week after next. So in that light, I would like to move an amendment, and if you indulge me, the amendment will read as follows, and we will circulate this in English and French. The amendment will be that the motion, the words be deleted after the words dated November 13th, 2020, that the rest be deleted, and the following be added. And the following will be that when these documents are received by the clerk, they be available at the clerk's office for viewing by committee members only for 1 week, to be designated by the committee no later than 30 days following the receipt of the contracts under the supervision of the clerk, and that no personal, mobile, electronic, or recording devices of any kind be permitted in the room that week, and that no notes be taken out of the room. And so, to be clear, because I know this is a fairly substantial change, the full motion would read that pursuant to Standing Order 108.1, A, this committee order the production of unredacted copies of the vaccine supply contract between the Government of Canada and Medicago Inc., dated November 13th, 20, that when received, that when these documents are received by the clerk, they be available at the clerk's office for committee members only, et cetera, et cetera. So that is the amendment I'm proposing, and we will, that amendment has been sent to the clerk. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hanley. Is it the will of the committee to suspend briefly to have a look at the amendment before continuing debate?
Yes.
Can I ask a point of order?
A point of order from Mr. Perkins, please.
Mr. Henley's amendment essentially guts my motion, or Dr. Ellis's motion, I should say, and totally changes the nature and intent of the motion. So I'm not sure it's in order.
Thank you. I think it's a good idea for us to suspend, both for you to have a look at it and for me to take advice on Mr. Perkins' point of order. Thank you.
Point of order as well.
Ms. Gladue?
Yes. So if you decide that the amendment is in order and we're going to proceed with that, I just want to make sure that those that have their hands up to speak, there's no real way when you're virtual to re-put your hand up, and I just want to make sure we maintain the speaking order. Thank you, sir.
That would be my intention. The fact that if we, after the suspension, if we are dealing with the debate on the motion, the speaking order doesn't get canceled to start over again. All right, we stand suspended for 5 minutes. After consulting with the clerk, I rule the motion to be in order. Mr. Perkins makes a valid point that the scope of the motion is substantially reduced by the amendment. It isn't unusual for witness lists to be impacted by an amendment. The amendment continues to remain consistent with the spirit of the motion, which is the production of documents. And so I therefore rule it in order. And the next up on the speaker's
Mr.
list.
Chair, point of order.
Yes, Mr. Perkins, on a point of order.
Well, I respect the advice that you've been given. I don't agree with it. Dr. Ellis's motion talks about releasing these important contracts publicly and talks about making sure that all of the contracts are available and open so that we can expose this. The amendment says that we're going to keep it secret. That's the opposite of what the motion says. The motion is about open and transparent contracts, putting the contracts in a situation where nobody except the committee members can see them, can't talk about them, can't do anything in their confidentiality, and nobody in the public sees it, is actually the complete opposite of this motion. So I challenge the chair on your motion, on your ruling.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. So there is a motion to challenge the ruling of the chair. That is not debatable and will go straight to a vote. So the question for the committee is, shall the ruling of the chair be sustained?
So if you vote yes, you're agreeing with the chair. If you vote no, you are challenging the ruling of the chair. So Ms. Atwin?
Yes.
Mr. Henley?
Yes.
Mr. Joahi?
Yes.
Mr. Polowski?
Yes.
Ms. Sidhu?
Yes.
Monsieur Paulus?
No.
Mr. Ellis?
No.
Mr. Perkins?
No.
Mr. Majumdar?
No.
Madame Vignola?
No.
Mr. Davids?
Yes.
6 yeas, 5 nays.
So the ruling of the chair is sustained. The motion, the amendment is in order. The debate is on the amendment, and Mr. Davies has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Happy New Year, everybody. Hope everybody had a chance for a restful and festive holiday season, and looking forward to joining you all in Ottawa as well. I have, I guess, a number of things to say. First of all, Mr. Ellis was talking about this 106, I think he made a reference to the block signing the 106, and the implication was that the NDP did not sign it. One thing I think needs to be clarified for the record is that the NDP never saw this motion. We were not given an opportunity to sign it or not. Mr. Ellis sent a request for me to look at whether we would entertain a Section 106 motion on the BTNX data issue, not on Medicago. So I think that for anybody listening, has to be clear that that we were not invited to see this motion in advance, nor given a chance to support it or not. Second, I just want to say for the record, this once again, I think, is an opportunity for me to express my grave disappointment in both the Conservatives, frankly, and the government for opposing the NDP's motion moved at this committee to amend legislation that would have produced a independent public inquiry into all matters of the government's handling of the COVID pandemic under the Inquiries Act. And somewhat shamefully, I watched the Conservatives sit on their hands and abstain, which allowed my motion to be defeated. We would have legislation before the House right now that would be close to setting up such a commission that would look at not only Medicago, but every vaccine contract. So when the Conservatives come to this committee and talk about transparency and disclosure, I think Canadians need to know that they prevented that very disclosure and transparency from happening, broadly speaking, on the COVID pandemic entirely. And that is a contradiction that I think needs to be stated for the record. The NDP's position on how the government handled the COVID pandemic and how it dealt with health-related matters is that we have been pro-transparency from the very beginning. We believe that taxpayers have a right to know how their money's spent, and parliamentarians have a duty to probe and to hold the government accountable. I remember Prime Minister Trudeau's statement when he was elected in 2015 that he believed in government that is open by default, and I think that's a wise way to approach it. That we should, as a I think, starting point, be very open and transparent, and that's even when hard information, embarrassing information, mistakes are exposed. In fact, arguably, particularly when errors are made, I think it's important that we have an open airing in a democracy. Having said that, I can appreciate as well, having sat through many debates on this, and I moved the motion last Parliament to have disclosure of all the vaccine contracts, and to the Conservatives' credit at that time, through my colleague Michelle Rempel-Garner and other Conservatives, we did join together and seek and obtain vaccine contracts. But through that process, we were all made aware that totally unredacted contracts by commercial arrangements from the government is a delicate matter. I can appreciate that there can be certain commercial sensitivities. For example, price. When you have commercial vendors dealing with the government and multiple competitors are competing, they probably don't want their internal pricing structure to be known necessarily by their competitors. So I understand the need for some redaction. I will say that I think that that concept has been over relied upon by this government, and that's been, I think, unfortunate, because I think too many things have been held back under the guise that it's commercially sensitive when it really isn't. And so I think we have to be careful to strike that balance. So moving to this motion here as well, I have to also agree with my colleague, Dr. Hanley, that I fail to see the urgency in this. A Section 106 meeting is a particular type of vehicle that's used that upsets the regular schedule that's all been agreed upon. And it, to me, as a responsible parliamentarian, it's used for when a matter of national importance that's urgent requires our committee's attention. And I would point out that we do have an open Medicago study that this motion could have been moved at any time during that or during our regular sitting. So I don't really understand why we're here on a Friday before in our constituency week, as Dr. Hanley mentioned, talking about getting a contract. The issue is done. The contracts are there. They're not going to change this week or a week or two from now. We're talking about contracts that were signed several years ago. So I don't see the urgency. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention is I think there's a line to be drawn between health issues and procurement issues. When I read this motion, I didn't get a chance to study it in detail. Obviously, we only got it this morning. But when I read this motion that was originally put before us and as amended, it is deeply delving into, I think, issues of procurement, intellectual property, and the financial transactions. We are the health committee. And, there is an industry committee. It's already been pointed out several times. The medical contract was sought and obtained at the Public Accounts Committee. So we have multiple committees that are looking at this. So the question I have in my mind is this a good use of our time as health committee, particularly, as I will talk in a moment, given the competing priorities, because we can't deal with everything. We have to prioritize our issues. So is this issue to delve into, to have Minister Champagne, who's not even the minister responsible to this committee, come before us as we delve into commercial transactions and fiscal issues around procurement, important as they are. I will grant that to Mr. Perkins. He's done. I want to commend him for the deep dive he's done on this. He appears extremely knowledgeable about this. He's clearly read the contracts in great detail. It's not that they're not important. The issue is whether or not this committee's time as the health committee is this the proper venue for that. I find myself being unpersuaded by that. I want to talk about the competing priorities. We have a women's health study that's underway that's never been studied by this committee. So 50% of the Canadian population and all of the health issues that pertain to that are currently the subject of this committee. That would have to be postponed. Second, we have the opioid overdose crisis. And quite rightly, we listened to several filibusters before Christmas by Conservatives who went on and on at length about how critical the opioid overdose crisis is and how massively important it was that we get to that right now. So much so that they moved and we agreed to disrupt the schedule of the women's health study by interjecting meetings with the opioid overdose study, which, by the way, I want to commend Dr. Hanley for moving. It was his motion to put the opioid overdose crisis before this committee. We have many, many other issues of momentous importance of health in this country, including Indigenous health, including the fact that millions of Canadians can't see a family doctor. We have nursing crisis. We have issues of all types. We have a diabetes crisis. We have many, many issues to talk about. So the issue is, in my mind, I'm thinking, do I want to devote 6 meetings to delving into the Ministry of Innovation's dealings with a foreign company on how they handled the fiscal arrangements about the transfer of intellectual property? I find myself saying that doesn't meet my priority, nor does it jibe with what I'm hearing from my constituents about what they want to see from their healthcare system. Now, fiscal probity is important. Financial accountability is important. Nobody wants to see waste. I think the Conservative motion is very, very good at raising the importance of those issues. But Public Accounts is looking at this. The ministry or the Committee for Industry and Innovation, et cetera, can look at this as well. To me, I think that's the more appropriate place for it. Now, I also want to, I find myself unclear as well about what exactly has not been disclosed, because the Medicago contract was disclosed, I think, in largely unredacted form, if not unredacted form. I think Dr. Hanley's motion, if I'm not mistaken, and I may be, replicates the conditions that surrounded the disclosure of the Medicago vaccine contract at Public Accounts. Mr. Perkins read some very pertinent, I think, sections of that contract that give us the information we need. I mean, there's an issue, I suppose, of whether or not the answers given by the ministers and the president of Medicago are consistent with that or not. But that's not an issue of disclosure. That's an issue of I guess politics and satisfaction of answer. We don't need more content. The information's there and it's revealed, and Mr. Perkins was reading it. So I'm not quite clear what information remains unknown from the Medicago vaccine contract. I also want to say that Mr. Perkins, in his last intervention, said something about that the amendment that was made by Dr. Hanley is inconsistent with this, or it somehow gags us. I don't read anything in Dr. Hanley's motion that says that we can't speak about it. There's nothing in there that says, after reading that contract, that we can't come and speak publicly about it or raise it at this committee. The amendment says that when the documents are received by the clerk, they'll be available at the clerk's office for viewing by committee members for 1 week, to be designated by the committee, no later than 30 days, under the supervision of the clerk, and that no personal, mobile, electronic, or recording devices of any kind be permitted in the room. So that means you can't take pictures of it, and that you can't take notes out of the room. So that just means that we can read it, you can talk about it, you just can't take it. And I would assume that that's because we are going to be, even under this amendment, we are going to be allowed as committee members to read the full unredacted version of the contract, and we'll be able to speak about it. But what we don't want to do is disclose that, because we are, I would imagine, going to see commercially sensitive information. Interesting, I just want to say for the record, it's an interesting point in history. If the time ever comes where there is a conservative government, I'm going to remember this day very, very clearly and make sure that any future conservative government reveals full unredacted versions of all commercial contracts that they have with all vendors with the federal government. And we'll see if that happens. I did serve under a majority and minority conservative government. I can tell you that was absolutely not the position of any conservative government or conservative member of parliament that I ever saw. Quite the opposite, actually. So I just I want to say that I think that the amendment is a measured amendment. It allows us to see the unredacted version of the contract, which I think is a good thing. It allows us then to see whether there's anything in the redacted versions that might cause us to want to schedule more time or recall a minister. I want to say again, 6 meetings. Nothing I've heard today would warrant devoting 6 meetings. Better part of it, that's a month in the parliamentary calendar terms, to this, when we don't even really know if the unredacted versions are going to really indicate anything particularly profound or untoward. Maybe it will, but what I'd like to do is move in measured fashion, read the contract, see the unredacted version, and then we can decide as a committee if we want to, or individually, whether we think that there's anything that is worth putting back before the committee to study. And again, what I'm going to be looking for as well is whether or not I think this is more of an issue of finance, procurement, or industry, or whether it's a matter that ought to occupy the health committee's attention at this time. And once again, given the very, very pressing, urgent, frankly, fatal issues facing many Canadians while we talk. And where I'll conclude is this, is do Canadians want us to be getting on with the opioid study, where there's families right now who have loved ones who are dying today? I think the number is, 7 people will die in Canada today, if I'm not mistaken, from the opioid overdose crisis. Or do they want us to be delving into the minutiae of an intellectual property transfer between several companies and the government, when other committees are seized of the matter and are more properly mandated to deal with them? I would rather deal with the matters of life and death and health, pure health, that are before this committee, as opposed to that grandstanding to try to embarrass the government in many different ways. So I support the amendment, and I'll be voting in favor of it.
Thank you, Mr. Davies. Suite de Monsieur Paulus, à vous la parole.
Mr. Paulus, you have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, my colleague from the NDP spoke, and we don't really know why NDP is trying to block us from getting to the truth in all this. Because it has to do with how the government is managing things when we were dealing with the pandemic, with all kinds of contracts under the Department of Health that ordered the vaccines, and how those amounts, those funds were managed. That has to do with the Department of Health. So it has a connection with the Health Committee in that way. And there's always this mania of managing things in silos, and there's never anyone, one person at least, who is in charge of a holistic picture. So we need to get to the bottom of this, and our colleague from the NDP should side with the Conservatives and the Bloc Québécois, so that we get to know more about this, about the utilization of public funds that just disappeared. So my colleague, Mr. Perkins, was also saying this. We're not necessarily talking about a scandal. We're talking about competency of management. So we just want to know what happened with the contract and why those amounts were spent. So where are we going with this? We have the amendment before us. Our Liberal colleague moved it. And then there's also the NDP. I'm just trying to situate myself in all of this, but I think the issue at stake here is super important and it's urgent. I'm in Quebec. I'm from Quebec. That's where it happened. Medicago was supposed to develop vaccines here, have facilities here, but the first scandal broke when we found out that after having received $173 million, the company was bought by Mitsubishi, and then there was this other payment of $150 million that was made without further us knowing any more about what was going on. So I think we are in a position where we have to shed light on what happened, why the money was paid, why the money did not come back. The government of Quebec also engaged in similar schemes, but they were reimbursed at 100%. So that was more efficiently done. But we have to understand why we're trying to beat around the bush, and rather than getting to the bottom of it.
Merci, Monsieur Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Paulus.
Dr. Pawlowski, please.
Yeah, I think we want to get to the vote, but having said that, I'm sufficiently ticked off about this that I want a couple minutes to speak about it. Yes, this is an important matter. How the government spends public money is important, and that's why we're willing to vote for the opposition to be able to look at the contract. So be it. Go ahead. However, to bring this forward as a 106.4 motion, I think is a real abuse of process. That's something that's urgent. These are contracts which are at least 2 years old. I remember, and those of us who sat on HESA throughout COVID will remember the fact that we had long discussions about the release of the contracts at that time. This is 2 years later. These are contracts which are already being made available to another committee, and yet some conservative in the middle of the night wakes up with this brainwave that, oh my God, what happened with those contracts and we haven't seen them. Let's call back HESA committee to discuss this right now. Well, is that really more important than, for example, the opioid study? I'd be far happier to be sitting here and talking about the opioid crisis, which the Conservatives were talking about over the last number of weeks. There's, as to Don's number, the number 6 came up, the Government of Canada website says 22 deaths per day. Is that worthy of calling back HESA? No, doesn't seem to be, not to the Conservatives. They'd rather bring up this issue of the contracts and procuring contracts because that's more urgent. How about the women's study? And how about the things that we studied, like recommendations on breast cancer screening? Like, I don't know, thousands of women die every year from Canada because of breast cancer. You would think that maybe that would be something we would urgently talk about, but no, that's not urgent either. What's urgent are these contracts that are 2 years old. So I think it's a real abusive process that we're called back to discuss this. Is this more important? Should we put aside all those other things to study this for 6 sessions? Absolutely not. And you guys should be embarrassed for making this motion. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Pawlowski. Next, Ms. Atwin.
I'll cede my time, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Atwin. Ms. Gladue, please.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I want to clear up some of the misinformation and disinformation I've heard so far. The Public Accounts Committee is not looking at this issue. They are seized with other issues. And as I understand it, the Industry Committee is busy looking at the Sustainable Green Fund scandal, the problems with C27 privacy bill, the Stellantis contract scandal. So they are also not looking at this. And I'm extremely concerned with the pattern of behavior I see with medical contracts. We've got this Medicago one, where clearly there were 2 contracts and there's been a $150 million payment to Mitsubishi that isn't mentioned anywhere in anything that we've seen. And so that's questionable. And this is on top of things like the Frank Baylis, let's spend $172 million, buy ventilators, never use them. And then where do we get the money back or sell those ventilators to do something like these kinds of things are happening all the time. And when the ministers come, we always hear they didn't read their emails, they weren't aware of the details of the contract, but there are electronic bank records that go with every one of these transfers. So I don't accept that we can't get to the bottom of where this is. And I also, would call that when the Liberals say they want to have transparency, but then they bring an amendment like what they brought, which is to say, okay, you can come and look at it. You can't take pictures of it. You can't record it. That puts us in a situation where, we see it. Mr. Davies has correctly said we could talk about it. But as soon as we say, well, the contract said this, and this is a problem, then the NDP will line up, as they always do, with their Liberal partners and say, no, it doesn't say that. And again, the public has no way of knowing what the truth is because there's no transparency at all. And so what I would propose to the amendment that's been made is a sub-amendment. The sub-amendment would be to take out some of the wording within the amendment. So it would be that when these documents are received by the clerk, they be available to committee members no later than 30 days following the receipt of the contracts. That would be it. And I would mail that to the clerk so that he has it in both official languages. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gladue. So just to be, just for clarity.
It is a sub-amendment to the amendment.
I understand. You're suggesting that we add after the word only, so in the second line it says viewing by committee members only, and then to say not later than 30 days? Is that?
Yeah, in the amendment, we would delete the phrase that says at the clerk's office for viewing by.
Okay.
That would go away. And that we would also delete after to committee members only, we would delete that. For 1 week to be designated by the committee, that deleted. No later than 30 days following the receipt of the contracts, keep that in. And then under the supervision of the clerk, and that no personal mobile, electronic, or recording devices of any kind be permitted in the room that week, and that no notes be taken out of the room, that whole part be deleted. So basically it ends up saying that when these documents are received by the clerk, they're available to committee members no later than 30 days following the receipt of the contracts.
Thank you. That amendment is in order. Do we need some time to see that, or are we ready to continue? Anyone require a suspension to have a look at the wording?
I think we're good. Keep going.
Mr. Chair, I'd like a suspension for 5 minutes. I like the process of sending it in writing to us so that we have it all in front of us in writing.
Yeah. Agreed. I'm inclined to agree with Mr. Davies. We're suspended for 5 minutes. Getting back to order, nous sommes encore en ce.
We are resuming. And next MP to take the floor will be Madame Vignola on the sub-amendment. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We, the Bloc Québécois, we signed the 106.4 without having been aware of the 108.1. So Medicago, it represents $150 million that were given to this company under public accounts, under a chapter that is quite mysterious. So one has to ask the question. And when I asked the question during a previous meeting, they told me, well, it's considered as an accident. But my questions will be in line with what has been asked by my colleagues and all of our colleagues, actually, because yes, we need to get answers. Is health the best place to get these answers? It's a good question as well. Because when we talk about women's health, for instance, there are 700 diseases that are misdiagnosed when it comes to women because due to a lack of studies on feminine morphology and just a lack of studies in general. For instance, breast cancer. Members of my own family are grappling with that, dealing with that. I mean, can some of these cases be snipped at the bud? Yes, that might be interesting. So I'm also not the only person to be dealing with such issues. But let's get back to Medicago. There are questions to be asked on the circumstances, on the guarantees. Definitely, that is the case. And there are questions on the procedure that was followed, why it was followed. And had Mitsubishi not abandoned Medicago, would we be talking about it now? Or would we have accepted the fact that the investment was made to increase the supply and the availability of vaccines in Canada? Well, I don't have the answer. Did Canada take a risk that it shouldn't have taken? I don't have the answer to that either. The fact that sometimes Canada is asked to function with the flexibility of a private company, does it lead us to what we're studying or what we may end up willing to study? I don't have the answer to that. Where did the 150 millions go? Research and development cost a fortune. Did it go to research and development, or did this amount of money help accelerate the construction of the production plant, which was going to take place in Quebec? I don't have the answer to that. Well, having answers to questions about taxpayers' money that is trusted to a government is the least we can do. When it comes to the sub-amendment and the the amendment and the sub-amendment, I'm still having a hard time understanding the thing about, yes, you can look at the documents, but you cannot talk about it. Yes, you will get the truth, but you cannot share it, whether it's positive or negative. Whether it makes the news in favor of one party or the other, that's something else. But the electors and what they need to know, what they want to know, is what I have on my mind. It is important for me that people in our ridings know what we did with their money, their taxes. So we have to answer the following questions. Is the health committee, is it the best committee to do this work? Because we're talking about public accounts since the beginning and new information that surfaced at public accounts. Should we send the motion there? Should we maybe think about our own procedures? I'm just asking these questions. I'm thinking out loud and without filtering myself. Mr. Chair, if the amendment is adopted, would it necessarily mean that the MPs will not be allowed to talk about what they will have read in public?
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madame Vignola. Next up, Mr. Majumdar.
Thank you. You know, I was listening to our NDP Liberal colleagues being inconvenienced by being brought before this committee to explain how $150 million of lost money by pure government incompetence are not somehow a priority to my constituents. Well, they're telling me this is important. They're drowning under a cost of living tsunami, a mortgage meltdown coming their way at the speed of a freight train. And this government, this coalition, is not interested in revealing the transparent facts around their incompetence of over $150 million. The carbon tax has been making life absolutely intolerable. I'm in Calgary. You have all seen the weather that we have to deal with here. So don't tell me and lecture to me why this is not a priority for my constituents. So I wanted to respond to some of the pablum I was hearing from some of our colleagues around the table very clearly. I think it's important to proceed to a vote. I defer my time to Dr. Ellis.
Well, that's fortunate because the next person on the speaker's list is, in fact, Dr. Ellis. You have the floor, sir.
Thanks very much, Chair. And can you just refresh the committee's mind here? Is there more speakers after myself, sir?
I have Mr. Perkins, followed by Mr. Davies, and that is the complete speakers list at this time.
Great, thank you very much. You know, it's interesting. You know, we have a country that's falling apart. We have a healthcare system that is crumbling before our eyes. As mentioned, there are 22 people dying every day by opioids, and therefore bringing a motion forward with respect to $150 million at Health Committee, which directly assesses the veracity of testimony given by the Minister of Health and the President of Medicago at the Health Committee, makes perfect sense. What better time to do it than when Dr. Pawlowski didn't want his vacation or his time with his constituents interrupted, nor did Mr. Davies. That really makes no sense to me. We're here to work on behalf of Canadians, and as Mr. Majumdar correctly pointed out, so many Canadians are reaching out to us. And listen, I'm sure they're reaching out to you guys as well and gals, whether you want to admit it or not, that they are being crushed by the fiscal irresponsibility of this government. I find it laughable that Mr. Davies says, well, we didn't ask him to sign the 106.4 when he wouldn't sign a 106.4, which directly is related to a loss of $2 billion more because a company lied. Health Canada knew about it, and they accepted it as being true and moved forward anyway. So why would I ask him to sign a letter when he won't sign one for $2 billion, he won't sign for $150 million, and the results, of course, of the way he votes to gut this incredible motion that was before committee here today for transparency, which Dr. Hanley correctly said in his opening remarks. He talked very clearly about transparency and then introduces a motion to gut the transparency. Wow, talk about hypocrisy. Anyway, you know what? That being said, we know that there's an innumerable number of scandals. There's not enough committees to handle all the scandals this Liberal NDP coalition government is creating. And of course, there are not enough committees to attempt to address the fiscal incompetence that continues. Therefore, I'm quite happy to get to a vote so that we can ask everyone here where their cards are going to be laid and what side of history that they are going to choose to be on. That of competence, good fiscal management, or are they going to continue to be the costly cover-up coalition? That's the question that will be answered here today. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Ellis. Mr. Perkins, please.
I'll be unusually brief. It's a simple question. It's a simple question. I believe the Minister of Health and the President of Medicago lied to this committee about the $150 million payment, about a clause they claimed existed that doesn't exist. This committee has the responsibility to call them back and call them on their misrepresentation to Parliament. Thank you.
Mr. Davies.
Well, in the spirit of trying to get to the vote, I can sense we want to move forward. I think that's a good thing. I have a couple of just brief comments. One is one of the problems with the sub-amendment by Ms. Gladue is that there would be no controls whatsoever on confidentiality, and I'm a bit concerned by that. I haven't read the whole contract, but again, when you have a commercial vendor who is tendering with the government, I think there needs to be some at least examination or possibility of ensuring that the contract isn't just floated out in public without any controls on it. And I don't see those controls in the sub amendment. The issue is, as well as I'm going to repeat again that my reading of this motion, and I think Madame Vigneault asked this question without an answer, but we can speak about it. We can share it, just can't reproduce it. And I think that's a measured step. I would also say to my colleagues, this isn't the end of the matter. I mean, once we read the contract, it's open to any member of the committee who has concerns about what they do see in the unredacted version to put forth another motion if they want. And maybe the time will come where a deeper dive will have to happen. I'm just not necessarily convinced that that's happened yet. Just to the motion of whether this is a priority or urgent, nobody's saying that this issue isn't important, or it's not even a priority. The question, I think, and I agree with Dr. Pawlowski, is whether or not this was urgent. And I don't think anybody can make a credible case that here on Friday, January 19th, that this issue was urgent to deal with given the context. We can debate how much of a priority is. I still will stand with the 20 people dying a day and the opioid overdose crisis as being a bigger priority than the nuances of this contract, as important as it may be. Finally, I just want to say, my issue with Dr. Ellis, I didn't know clairvoyance was part of his medical skills as to anticipate what I would or wouldn't agree to. Interestingly, when he asked me to consider a 106 on the other issue of $2 billion, which, by the way, has not been established yet, my only issue was that I didn't think it was urgent. I didn't think it warranted us meeting today to discuss that. So I may support it in the future or not. I don't know about his mind reading skills. But interestingly, if his argument is he wouldn't have the courtesy to show me this motion in advance because I didn't vote or didn't support one much larger, one might ask the question, why didn't he introduce the motion that he said he would on the much larger issue? If there's a $2 billion scandal, why didn't he introduce a 106 on the $2 billion scandal, not the $150 million scandal? Like, so the logic there is as distorted as can be. So anyway, I'm happy just to go to a vote on this. I think this is an important issue. I think it warrants further investigation. I'm happy to support transparency. I'm happy to support all committee members to see the unredacted version of this contract, and I'm happy to see where it goes from there. And I think the attempt to frame this by the Conservatives that if one doesn't support their motion with all of the issues involved, like the 6 meetings and the involving the industry minister and all this, if you don't support that, you don't support transparency and accountability is simply wrong. So I think this is a measured step towards more transparency, and I'm prepared to support it.
Thank you, Mr. Davies. That exhausts the speakers list on the sub-amendment. So we're now, unless there are any other interventions, we're now going to proceed with the question on the sub-amendment. Just want to be crystal clear exactly what the sub-amendment is, and the clerk is now revising the last email that was sent out because it included a reference to the office of the clerk that I don't think was what Ms. Gladue moved. So my understanding of the sub-amendment is that it is to delete after the word available, delete the words at the clerk's office for viewing by committee members only for 1 week to be designated by the committee, and to delete the words after the word contract, so a deletion of the words under the supervision of the clerk, that no personal, mobile, electronic, or recording device of any kind be permitted in the room that week, and that no notices be taken out of the room. So what we would be left with after the sub-amendment is the following: that when the documents are received by the clerk, they be available no later than 30 days following the receipt of the contracts, period.
Point of order?
Yes, Ms. Gladue, go ahead.
It's very close, but not quite.
Go ahead,
That
please.
when these documents are received by the clerk, they be available to committee members no later than 30 days following the receipt of the contracts. Thank you.
Okay. Is everyone clear on the wording of the sub-amendment? Just, yeah, go ahead. Sorry. Only to be included in the sub-amendment, so the word only is there now, so does that remain? So viewing by committee members only? Yes or no?
No, only.
So that
So
word should,
they could be viewed.
so that word should be removed as well. That's part of the sub-amendment. Okay.
Correct.
Okay. So
Understanding every last version for everybody.
is everyone clear on the wording of the sub-amendment, or do you want another email with the wording that we've just discussed? It's actually being sent as we speak. So my question for you is, are we ready for the question?
Yes, I think we should call the question.
I see nodding heads. So the question is on the sub-amendment. All those in favor of the sub-amendment, please raise your hand.
Chair, given the confusion, I think we should have a recorded division.
A recorded division has been requested. Madam Clerk?
Yes. Ms. Atwin?
Against.
Mr. Henley?
Against.
Mr. Juari?
Against.
Mr. Polowski?
Against.
Ms. Sidhu?
Against.
Mr. Paulus?
Wait.
Mr. Hillis?
Yes.
Mr. Perkins?
Yes.
Mr. Majumdar?
Yes.
Madame Vignola? Mr. Davids?
No.
Five yeas, 6 nays.
Sub-amendment is defeated, so the debate is now on the amendment. Are there any interventions on the amendment? Seeing none, are we ready for the question? Heads nodding. All those in favor of the amendment, please raise your hand.
Sorry, Chair. Once again, I'd like to request a recorded division, please.
A most reasonable suggestion that we will adopt a recorded division on the amendment. Madam Clerk, please.
Ms. Atwin?
In favor?
Mr. Henley?
In favor.
Mr. Juari?
Support.
Mr. Polowski?
4.
Ms. Sidhu?
In favor?
Monsieur Paulus?
No.
Mr. Hillis?
Totally against.
Mr. Perkins?
Against.
Mr. Majumdar?
Against.
Madame Vignola? No. Mr. David?
In favor.
6 yeas, 5 nays.
The amendment is adopted, and so the debate is now on the motion as amended. Are there any interventions? Seeing none, are we ready for the question?
Recorded division, please, Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Ellis. Madam Clerk, a recorded division on the motion as amended, please.
Ms. Atwin?
In favor?
Mr. Henley?
In favor.
Mr. Juari,
In favor.
Mr. Pawlowski,
In favor.
Ms. Sidhu,
In favor?
Monsieur Paulus,
No.
Mr. Ellis,
Against.
Mr. Perkins,
Contre.
Mr. Majumdar,
Opposed.
Madame Vignola, Mr. Davids,
Sorry? I'm in favor of the motion as amended.
6 yeas, 5 nays.
The motion is adopted as amended. Is there any further business? I see Dr. Hanley.
I move to adjourn the meeting.
Will of the committee to adjourn the meeting? I see heads nodding. We have consensus. The meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you in 10 days' time.